Good morning, lovelies! Today we're going to talk about my top 10 least favorite epic fantasy tropes. If you missed my video on the best epic fantasy tropes and you are confused as to what exactly epic fantasy is the subgenre of fantasy that takes place in a world totally separate from our own. Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, that type of thing. 90% of the time it takes place in a ripoff of a highly inaccurate version of medieval Europe, which I talk more about in numbers 5 and 6. These are the epic fantasy tropes that make me roll my eyes and even put a story down. Number 1, the damseled princess. A princess appears in the story. Is she going to be a three-dimensional character with her own hopes, dreams, narrative arc, and thoughts outside of Bang the hero? Or will she be as useless as a lump of coal and need to be rescued by the hero? We all know the answer to this one. This has gotten better. I do not see the damsel princess as often as I used to. And when she does end up needing help, she does often appear as a fully fleshed out character and can often, sometimes, return the favor to the heroes, or at least help out in some other way. But, as I mentioned in my favorite epic fantasy tropes video, royal characters have so much potential. You literally have someone who has been trained from birth to lead a nation, to fight, to manipulate those around them, and to reduce them to a damsel or a love interest? Come on. Even if she can't necessarily fight, the princess should be useful to the team in some way. Number 2, princess marries the hero just because. I am not a fan of romantic subplots on the best of days. I am even less of a fan when it is shoehorned in at the last minute because we want the hero to become royalty as a reward for what he's done in this story. So he is going to marry this princess who literally only exists in the story to make that happen. And even when the story does have a believable romantic subplot that makes me genuinely believe that these two characters are in love and would be a good fit for each other, I mean, it rarely goes into the problem of, okay, so this commoner farm boy is now going to be king. I'm sure his years of living on a farm has totally prepared him for all the tasks of kingship. This was my beef with Frozen 2, which is a fine movie, certainly one of the better sequels that Disney has churned out. But rather than have Kristoff try to work up the guts to propose to Anna, a story that's already been done to death, they really should have focused on Kristoff freaking out over the fact that if he marries this girl, he is going to be a prince and possibly king. Make him weigh his love for Anna against the staggering responsibility of running an entire kingdom. That's not something that an ice seller is going to be prepared for. Oh my god, they really should have made that Disney movie more realistic. I mean, yeah, fine, come at me in the comments, but like, it would have been more interesting. Number 3, the Lost Heir. The marrying off the princess to the hero at least has a certain degree of sense within, like, the medieval fantasy world building. Princesses were often married off to powerful strangers that their kingly fathers wanted to keep in their corner. And the kid who managed to whip up an army and defeat the Dark Lord against all odds is a really good person to have as an ally. But a lost heir? No. If you are going to hide your prince or princess somewhere where they're not going to be found by the evil advisor who's usurping your throne, you also have to prepare them for the day that they are eventually not going to be lost. Because when that day comes, they're going to need to do things like lead an army and get all the other nobles to fight for them rather than their usurper really quickly. If you're going to play the historical accuracy card, most royals who had to flee their country because of usurpation did not run to the farms or the villages in the rural countryside somewhere so their kids would never know that they were royalty until assassins came to finish off the job. No, instead they fled to foreign countries that were sympathetic to their cause, because they granted them the protection that they needed. And they usually advertised the fact that they were the legitimate royalty because that was really the only way that they could whip up an army to take back their throne. Authors who use this whole Lost Heir hidden royal lineage trope need to work really hard to convince me that this was genuinely the best choice that the royal parents could have made for their child. Jon Snow is actually a really good example of this trope done well. To my knowledge, he is probably the only example of this trope done well. Maybe King Arthur in that recent reboot. Maybe. Number 4, the Dark Lord. It's not that I dislike the Dark Lord trope. I see the use of having a great big source of all evil to serve as the big bad guy and foil to the paragon hero. And if this Dark Lord has the charisma to pull it off, hey, good writing is any writing that works. But it is just so overused. So many authors just have, oh, the big villain is the Dark Lord who's going to take over the world. But we don't really get to see much of the Dark Lord, and when we do, he's kinda lame. He gets his ass kicked by a handful of teenagers. Why are we supposed to be scared of him? Number 5, no woman of power at all. Because historical accuracy, that it's not actually historically accurate when you look at how medieval Europe was actually run. They often had to be sneaky about it because yes, sexism, patriarchy, and misogyny are all things, but there have been plenty of women throughout history, queens, princesses, concubines, noblewomen, who have been the actual power of their lands. And more than one woman has gone onto a medieval battlefield and fought physically. Some of them were blatant about it, like Joan of Arc and Catherine of Aragon. Others disguised themselves as men. All of which is a moot point anyway, because we're writing a fantasy story in a world that does not exist and does not have our history. If you want to appeal to a sexist audience who loses their minds every time a female character has a thought outside of must-bang hero, you probably should not be watching my channel, like, at all. Seriously, all of my writing advice will piss off that audience. But if you want to appeal to a broader audience that lives in the 21st century, then we're going to need warrior women, queens and princesses who actually do shit, women who are spies, women who are pirates, and several women who have a life and narrative arc outside of men. Honestly, just start Googling badass women in history and you will receive entire mountains of inspiration. Number 6, no people of color. At all. If you want to see me lose my goddamn mind over this trope, you can watch me do that in this video when I covered 10 racist tropes in science fiction and fantasy. The no people of color thing is number 10. But like women of power, people of color have also existed in medieval Europe. And before that. So if you're trying to use historical accuracy to justify your racism in your fantasy book that once again takes place in a fantasy world that does not exist, you're shit out of luck. Number 7, the evil race. Because let's combine racism with lazy writing, shall we? Also something I talked about in the racist tropes video. Obviously, every story is different, and I hesitate to say that every single villain must be complex and sympathetic, but most stories could benefit from having at least one scene where the evil minions are just undeniably people. Complaining about their bosses, getting relationship advice, maybe even raising some objections to the evil that they're doing. You don't need to write Zuko-level redemption arcs here, but there has to be a middle ground between that and every one of my dark-skinned, accented orc creatures are the scum of the earth. Number 8, prophecies. Prophecies are a double-edged sword. A skilled writer can make them work, especially if the prophecy is vague enough that there are multiple ways to interpret it. Rick Riordan often pulls a sneaky with his prophecies. But lots of writers use them as the laziest form of foreshadowing ever. Or even worse, the characters will only be doing the plot because the prophecy said so. Not because their home is in danger, not for any personal reasons like, glory or redemption or just wanting a decent paycheck. No, they're literally only doing this stupidly dangerous mission because prophecy. Well, the prophecy said I'm supposed to do the thing, so I guess I'll do the thing. No one works like that. And I personally have beef with any type of philosophy that says you have zero control over your life and your own destiny because, God or the cosmos or fate or whoever has already determined every little detail of your life. Fuck that. I vastly prefer prophecies that are possibilities rather than certainties. Paul's future seeing abilities in the Dune series is actually a really great example of this, because he can physically see all of the possible outcomes of all the possible actions that he could take, and they change with every action that he takes, because your future stems from your present. That's just really cool. Number 9, The Chosen One. This farmer boy nobody is going to save the world. Why him? Wouldn't it make more sense for a royal or a noble person or someone else with easy access to the political field and an army to do that? No, because the farmer boy is the chosen one. Okay, but why him? Who chose this farmer boy, and why him rather than the several dozen more logical choices that could have been made here? Because... Chosen One! There are several different flavors of the Chosen One, some better than others. If you have weird cosmic powers, randomly assigned to you and no one else, or it's a family bloodline thing, yeah, fine, whatever, genetics are a bitch sometimes. But if the main character is literally different from nobody else except for their Chosen One status, no. They are literally only the chosen one because the author needs some in-universe way to justify why this character, who is some farm boy or commoner or someone else who has absolutely no business leading armies and talking back to royalty, It's lazy writing, end of story. Find a more creative way to get your peasant main character in on the action. You're a writer, that's your job. And number 10, Raiding Tokens Closet. Why should we come up with new spectacular fantasy races when we can just reuse tokens, orcs, dwarves, and elves? And I don't mean redefine them and their powers and culture the way that, say, Dragon Prince did. No. I mean we are literally just going to have the Scottish dwarves who mine for jewels and drink beer, orcs who do nothing but war, and elves who are all mysterious and smug. I get that it can feel like literally has already been done before, but yeah, please be a little more creative. If you're going to use old, familiar creatures in your epic fantasy world, why not use ones that we're not used to seeing in that setting? A personal example, in my fantasy manuscript, which my literary agents will be reading over the holidays, instead of elves, I have vampires taking the place of the smug immortals. Maybe, say, a wizard has found a way to make robots out of, like, magic, gears, and cloth, and now they're dealing with a robot uprising. Or a zombie apocalypse, which we really only see in contemporary settings. Or aliens. We've seen enough of the elves, dwarves, and orcs. Those are my least favorite epic fantasy tropes. Please share yours in the comments below. And if you want more, I have an entire playlist dedicated to tropes right here. I will see you next time. Bye, lovelies.